Hey there everybody and welcome back to another Blender tutorial. Today I'm going to show you how to make brick walls, but with a catch, it's completely procedural. So this is actually just a single face, and just using a material and some displacement, we get a realistic brick texture. The cool thing about this is if I edit this, and it's going to look a bit distorted to begin with, we're going to fix that though. If I add more geometry to this, I can actually kind of fix this by adding a UV map. And by just kind of like rotating this and scaling it, we get a procedural brick wall that we can keep extending and stuff like that. So I guess let me show you how to make this. So I'm basically going to start off with the plane, and the setup for this is very simple. In the modifiers tab, I want you to add a subdivision surface to this, set it to simple, and enable adaptive subdivision. If you don't see this setting, that's because A, you're not in cycles, and B, you don't have experimental enabled. So when you enable experimental, it adds some features like adaptive subdivision, which is a subdivision that is dependent on how close you are to the object, okay? This is how we're going to get more geometry for this, for displacement. I'm going to bring down the dicing scale, which basically means further subdivide it. And the rest of this is just making a fancy material. So a new material that I'm going to call brick. As you would expect, we're probably going to be using the brick texture that comes with Blender. So you can see we get a brick texture and we get a map of the mortar. Okay, so both of these are going to end up being useful if we want to use both of them. So the first thing I want to do is I want to make sure that this plane is actually displacing along the normal. So we're actually getting displaced bricks. And to do that, I'm going to add a displacement node. Haven't used this one in a minute, but connect displacement to displacement, connect the color to the height, and now when we view this, the only thing that's stopping this from actually being displacement, you can kind of see some bump or normal mapping. What's stopping this from being displacement is in the material settings. You have to go to surface displacement and make sure it's set to displacement only, which is what's going to actually give us geometry extruded in a sense, right? I'm going to take the scale and bring it down so it's not as intense, and you can see we're naturally getting some variation in the brick, and that's because this brick texture has different kind of colors of brick, and we can change that using the bias. So you can think of this as kind of like our extrusion randomizer as I move the bias around. So I'm just going to mess around with the bias until I kind of like the look of this, okay? And the rest of this is actually just changing the surface properties, right? Because we already have our displacement done. I just need to change the color of this and so on. So I'm just going to rotate this so we're actually getting lighting as if this was like standing, which is kind of the point. And for the BSDF, we're going to do something super simple. I'm going to connect the brick texture color to the base color, which again is just going to reuse this brick texture, except this time I'm going to send it through a color ramp to kind of remap these colors. So some of these bricks are going to be kind of like reddish brown, and then I'm going to add another handle. Some bricks are going to be darker, and you can see now we're getting some variation. And in between these, some of them are going to be like a low saturation kind of bright brick. And this kind of gives us 3 shades of brick to work with. Other things that we need to do is bring up the roughness, since I don't want this to be kind of a reflective brick. And what's going to really sell this effect and make it look more realistic is just add a noise texture. I'm going to send this through a bump node, which connected to height, which is going to give us some normal mapping, as you can see. So I'm going to connect this to the normal socket. And you can see we're getting more detail here, but it looks like horrible. So bring up the scale. Now it's looking a bit better, and bring up the detail. And now you can see all of a sudden our brick has a lot of like dimension to it. Not dementia, but dimension. And you can kind of mess around with the settings here. I might want some of these bricks to be kind of closer to white, is what I'm thinking, and a bit brighter. But you can do any kind of brick kind of color scheme that you want here. For the BSDF, I don't think we need to do much more to change it. I just want to mention that, again, all of this is driven by a brick texture. So if I move the scale, we get more or less brick. You can affect the mortar size, which is kind of like the gap in between the bricks, and also the the frequency, or what I meant is kind of like this offset in a sense. This is what I meant. And this lets you control your bricks procedurally. The last thing that is kind of interesting with this, so this is already a very nice material, but if I wanted to kind of extend this to different axes, it's not really going to work, because by default, this brick texture and this noise texture, by default they're using generated coordinates, even though it wasn't showing it. Instead, I'm going to use a coordinate system we have more control over, namely the UV coordinates, which isn't really going to fix the issue, but now if we fix our UVs, it's going to fix this as well. So if I go to the UV editor, I select everything, I hit U, unwrap, and you can see we have our unwrap here, and our mapping for this actually controls our brick. So just like that, we get a brick that wraps with it, and this is going to have some bricks that actually curve with the wall. And if you don't want that, but I think that's good, if you don't want that, you can just kind of offset this to be a different section of the map. But I like the look of it. And it's going to flow with our geometry. And the nice thing about this, again, this is kind of going to be kind of a weird use case, but if you have like a weird mesh, like a sphere, if we wanted to turn this into bricks, it would be very hard to model because you need to like model bricks and circles, and it would be very difficult to do. But if I just apply my brick material, it's going to automatically use the VMAP. The reason it looks weird is because we don't have enough geometry. So add a subdivision surface with adaptive subdivision, bring down the dicing scale, and now we got bricks going in a circle, a sphere. So that'd be kind of hard to do. So this is a very fast way to make brick walls that don't require geometry nodes or anything like this. So I just wanted to kind of show this off, and yeah, thank you for watching, and check out the Patreon if you want to get this blend file for free, in a sense. Once you pay for Patreon, you get this blend file.